Okay, so ethnographic imaginations of sound and sacrality. So, what is Sebanti? Let's start with you. Sacrality, sound and sacrality. So, is there a thing called sound of sacrality? Does sacredness have an arrangement of notes? Is there a music that embodies sacredness? If so, how would you define it? How would you define the sound of sacrality?
Right. Thank you for the kind introduction, and I'm very honored and privileged to be part of a literary festival. I'm used to classroom talks and academic sessions, and especially following the previous talk, which was quite heavy. Also, I hope I will be able to answer how can we imagine sacrality of sound. So I'll just quickly give you a brief intro to how I approach fieldwork, and that will help me contextualize if we can have a sacrality of sound. This was part of my PhD dissertation at Delhi University, which is now a book, and my reason why many people ask why have I chosen two localities, Goa and Shillong, and I'm neither from these places. I don't speak Khasi, I don't speak Konkani. And then what do I make sense? How do I put these ideas in these contexts? Now, one of the ways when I was just having a chat with Donovan also before this, that one thing was, usually Goa, the way Bollywood makes us imagine Goa, that it's a Catholic, heavily dominated Catholic Christian community, but that's a very small percentage of Goa. And but there is a very, Goan sacred music is also somehow found in Rush Hall Seminary, which becomes one of the sites of my ethnography. Ethnography is a methodology that we use in sociology and anthropology, where we immerse ourselves in fields for about 6 to 7 months, and I spent about 6 to 7 months in each of these places. I call it imaginations because every ethnographer have their own ways of interpreting a place and its people. I used sound as a way to understand the community. I don't know if there is a sacrality of sound. Being a Hindu upper caste, upper class person, trying to engage with a Christian musical belonging, for me, how I found myself understanding the sacrality of sound was through the performance rituals while I did participant observation with Goa University Choir and singing under the baton of Santiago Lusardi in Goa. But in Shillong, it was through observing rehearsals of the Aroha, Aroha choir, and then the Shillong Chamber Choir. I've also visited Martin Luther Christian University and had chats about why we need categories like regional, Western, and yeah.
Yeah, we'll come to that.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Sorry, I don't know if I just digress.
Let me take this to Donovan.
Yeah.
What very briefly, in musical theory, they have this thing called diabolus in musica, right? Which is, in layman's language, the tritone, the flattened fifth, which is called the devil's note. It's supposed to embody this sense of chill and foreboding. Is there such a thing called a God note? Perhaps the secret chord that David played to please the Lord? Is there a series of notes that you can arrange to embody, say, piety and sacredness?
Well, that's a tough one. Anyway, before I start, thank you so much, Mark, for the introduction, and Sebanti. Of course, when you see us talking here, first time we're just meeting each other. So all of you also, thank you so much for coming and listening to our talks. Looking at the, we call it diminished, no? Diminished fifth, yeah. The devil's note or the blues note, they call. God note, we actually don't have, so to say, but there's a God frequency.
Uh-huh.
You could look it up.
It's 98.3, is it?
No, not like that. Well, you can look it up. There's a frequency, a God frequency, before this 441 hertz was standardized. There was a God frequency before that. But I'll just leave it to you. You do your research and find out. It's the frequency of the universe together. After, I think some research says that it was during the Hitler times where he changed the frequency.
Okay.
But I'll leave it to you all so you can find out the God frequency.
So there is a God note. Go find out that God note. So I don't mean to trivialize this, but this is of course a discussion about the intersection of music and faith, and Sebanti will come back to you. So Donovan, as part of the Martin Luther Christian University, does faith play a part at all in your everyday imparting of lessons to your students? Because you're imparting lessons in a variety of styles, but how does faith come into it at all?
Well, I can think of that answer to for you is in two parts. From the university perspective, we do have values. So we have honesty, we have tolerance. All of these values are there in the university, written in black and white. We also have Christian values where compassionate is really spoken about, right? That is the university part of the answer. Individual part is, yes, we are taught, no, the biblical way of living, the right way, I won't say right way, but the biblical way of living, where we follow that. So it's an individual part of that answer, and you have the university part of that answer. I would.
Okay, we'll come back to that. When you talk about faith and imparting lessons, Sebanti, of course, a lot of your research was more aimed at choral voices. Of course, sacrality in music is more than that. We know that. But in terms of if you compare the choirs of Goa and Shillong, of course, Goa is a more Catholic sound, and Shillong has a very strong Protestant culture. So, is there a difference in the choirs of Shillong and Goa based on denomination, and perhaps certain aspects of regionality?
Yeah. So I talk about this in my book also, that this was never a comparison of both the sides, but how each region has, they have their own, distinct signature styles, and that depends on the colonial encounters, and like the Portuguese rule of 451 years in Goa, and the parochial schools, and then how I again go back to the Rochelle Seminary. When in Shillong in 1841, when the Welsh Presbyterian missionary came to both Lushai and Khasi Hills, and then how tonic solfa was set up, and there was a distinct way of teaching and learning. So those are the foundational ways in which choral music became a foundational aspect of the culture. But having said that, denominationally different, I have also not focused on church choirs. I have mostly focused on non-sacred, not non-sacred, but entertainment choirs who have a sacred
I like
ethic.
that, non-sacred.
Yes, in the sense, the intention. So what I have understood, and although my chapters, my Goa and Shillong chapters do take on different trajectories. There's a chapter in the book which is called Mapping Choral Voices, where I have in fact spoken to a lot of people, even Karen is there in my book. One of her quotes is there. She doesn't remember, she says now. But I have spoken to a lot of people and how they visualize music and what happens. Now, distinct difference, I would say, Vatican II, after in Catholic churches, it was decided that there will be some kind of vernacularization. So more than instrument, it was more about the letters of the song, the rhythm, and it was also how mandos and other folk music in Goa was introduced. In Presbyterian, Maukhar Presbyterian Church, for instance, you have the standing choir, and you have a particular way of having, these levels of singing for sacred intention as well. And
Should we listen to a demonstration? I believe we have some clips, right?
I do have a clip, but they are not, they are entertainment choirs, but maybe we can play the Goa number 2, that is first, and then we'll play a little bit of the Aroha and the Shillong Chamber Choir clipping.
So perhaps a little introduction before we play the clip. Goa 2, track 2.
Track 2 is that's us performing Sanctus, Carl Jenkins' piece in the Mont Festival, and actually the Ketevan World Festival in Goa at Capella de Mont. And yes, I'm also singing there. Yeah, I will talk about it after that.
Yeah, so you'll hear the reluctant mezzo soprano there somewhere.
It's a collective. So. Can we play the second one by Shillong Chamber Choir and then Aroha Choir as well? I've given 2 songs.
Would you like to talk about this first before we go ahead?
Yeah. So actually, I played this song because my book begins with this song as well. It was part of the Ketevan World Festival, which was curated by Santiago Luzardi. Unfortunately, we lost him during COVID. And I mean, in the sense that he was part of the Goa University visiting professor chair, and Goa University also has these different kind of weekly courses that introduces different kinds of engagements with cultural possibilities. Now, what happened in this, and as I say, was that it was for I'm presenting for the first time in a literary fest. That was the first time I sang in a church. And it was different. One of my professors from DU was also there. I mean, somehow he was giving some other course. But it felt like when I talk about that sacrality of sound, it was more about watching the baton of the conductor and trying to understand when to fade in and when to be prominent, when to step away from the mic. I do talk about recital voice, microphone voice. So those kind of things I learned and also, yeah.
Now that is a style that is steeped in Western classical tradition, right?
Yes.
Which means that there's the rigor that goes, the rigor and the regimentation is but it also comes from perhaps a different Western classical tradition and perhaps maybe what the Welsh Calvinists would have introduced in Shillong. So in that sense, can we trace a difference between that sound, which is steeped in that sort of Western classical tradition, and perhaps a sound that maybe the Welsh Calvinists brought to Shillong? Is it possible for you to delineate that?
So, for example, when I attended, church reciters, worship masses here in Shillong, especially in Sunday special, I could see some Duitara coming in, and it was also, there was, if it was informal, there was some gospel sort of tendency of singing as well. So yes, there was difference also. This was very formalized. Like I say about each region bringing in certain signature style, the conductors also bring in their set of ideas about how they would want a certain repertoire to be represented. So he's an Italian, Argentinian, composer and also an ex-seminarian, and he's used to teaching in in Seville, the Seville choir, and so he has a certain kind of feel.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. So. So, Donovan, let's come back to you. Now, when you are imparting education in Martin Luther Christian University, and you talk about faith as being important, but the sound of that faith is not that, is it? It's a different kind of sound. So, what is this kind of sound that you impart? This Christian, very Christian sound, perhaps that we inherited from the Welsh Calvinists. It's still tonic solfa, it's still the same notes. But what is it that's different about the way that Martin Luther Christian University imparts its musical education, even if it's faith-based?
Just to a little disclaimer, it's not just church music that we have there. We have regional music.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, we have regional music. We have Indian classical, Hindustani music, vocal and vocal. And we do have Western music as well. Church music is part of a paper, but not a specialized one. But it would be nice to venture into a specialized one. But yeah,
even outside the university, because you are very active within the church music scene. So church music scene as a whole within Meghalaya, how would the sound differ from that?
Well, you have to look from one denomination to another. You cannot paint with one brush all of it. This is just a general outlook of all of this. So I completed my thesis research last year on a study on church music of Khasi and Jaintia. So I got the opportunity to venture to all of these churches and to see, and that time it was during Corona times, and everyone were uploading their church service YouTube. No? So from there we could use, again, non-participant observant as a form of data collection. And I could see one of the major music style that Catholic Church are using is singing chant, right? Chant they use a lot of the church mode, Dorian, Ionian mode and all that. And you can also find in a secular point of songs where they also use that. If you say, this is church music, for me it's, what mode is he using, right? Going to a Presbyterian church, we talk about a lot of Welsh music. Welsh music is more of a Celtic music, more of a pentatonic scale. So are we talking about the pentatonic scale? Let's go a little deeper into Khasi traditional music.
I was coming there, but go ahead. Yeah.
What is that, right? What is Khasi traditional music or Khasi Christian music? So all of these comes in. I would just like to share from the research that I found. So I went and asked a bunch of questions to a lot of musicians. What would define as church music or the sound of church music? So I sent in using of Khasi traditional musical instrument. The percentage was high. Using of attire, Khasi traditional attire, percentage was high. The tonality, how we pronounce English, how we pronounce Khasi word, the using of the tonality of the Khasi word, Khasi song, percentage is high. But the highest, I'll tell you, is the use of vernacular. And that in itself, as a public acceptance, is the sound of using music in the vernacular language sounds sacred, so to say. Yeah.
Now, I'll come to you, Sebanti, but first, I mean, the Protestant, the Presbyterian Church actually has, it took a long time to incorporate indigenous Khasi instruments into church service. And in fact, instruments like the ksing are still, still it's difficult to introduce even now. So when we talk about this traditional sound of church music in the Khasi Hills, Khasi Jayanti Hills, is it accepted now? Are indigenous instruments accepted within the church? Is it, or is it played outside the church? Because a lot of people take offense at, indigenous instruments being played inside the church. So what's going on there?
Ready for stories?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So if we look at 40 years back, 40 or 50 years back, traditional instruments is a no-no, right? This is according to research. After 40 years back, then another 10 years back from now, the acceptance was there. The acceptance of traditional instruments, right? And then today, right now, it's there. There's no restriction of any sort. But I'll tell you stories that, I just want to, the flip side of it. Even drums were, forbidden to use. I went into some programs where we even get letters, right? Just to be controversial a little bit. Don't tell anyone. So we even get letters for drums not to use in the church, right? Forget about traditional instruments, just drums, Western instrument. Guitar, I hope some of the Khasi people here can relate. Guitar was associated with festivals. So all of these instruments, with due time, I feel the acceptance came in. But what I want to bring this picture is, in choir music, traditional music and instruments is highly accepted. You'll see a lot of incorporation is happening in choir music. Praise and worship music is here and there. They'll have like recordings here and there. But hymnal, still not there. Regular Sunday service, you won't see. So you have different layers. I cannot answer in just one yes or no, but different layers and different music background.
So thanks Donovan. So he's laid out, delineated the whole thing for us there. Of course, yours is a study mostly in the choral tradition, right? Is it more difficult to bring out indigeneity in the choral tradition, mainly because the choral tradition itself is very like we said, steeped in the Western classical tradition. I mean, it's the separation of voices, the classification of voices to alto and soprano and all that is itself a very Western tradition. So in the choral tradition is like taking the example of Goa and Shillong to a certain extent, is it more difficult to be indigenous?
I'll just play the clip by Aroha. Can you play that? I think then I'll talk about it. That's okay. So this was one of the, transcribed uh, choral arrangement by Pauline Vajri, and this also came out in uh, a version of Silent Night in Khasi language. Also came out in Shillong Chamber Choir's 2020 Christmas album. So I think the kind of choirs I looked at for my kind of study, especially, which was not based out of church per se, but entertainment choirs, maybe trying to take the genre of singing Western style choir music and experimenting with it. They have sometimes used indigeneity in the form of placing the language, the Khasi language, rather than other forms of experimentation. Because I mean, in my conversations with Auntie Pauline, there was a time when they had tried to do something with Tangmuri and trying an opera, but then the form of the instrument did not really lend support to the Western imagination. So there are also some musical sort of difficulties when it comes to imaginations of trying to bring folk instruments or indigenous local instruments with a certain kind of Western imagination. Now, of course, then I do talk about something called sonic interculturality, where there is a dialogue between how we have made sense of the colonial encounters, and we, in the sense, the different regions that I'm talking about in Goa and Shillong. And with their complexity, how do they curate and cultivate consciously a different kind of sacrality? And so I guess indigeneity in the agency that I see amongst the choristers in Shillong, especially Shillong Chamber Choir and Aroha, it has been about bringing the language to the forefront. Maybe there will be a time where we'll see more of other things as well. Yeah.
So, Donovan, I mean, for example, do you remember the Panter Orchestra? So, like an example of the Panter Orchestra, which is an indigenous orchestra, totally revolving around, say, Khasi sounds, right? Traditional sounds. It's not Khasi sounds. Now, something like that is. How do you measure authenticity in a choir like that, or other indigenous choirs?
When you talk about Pinter, it's more of a it's a group of, it's a band, so to say, and it sings a lot of folk songs.
Yeah, it's a folk choir and
Yeah.
a folk orchestra. So,
Yeah.
in terms of when we're talking about indigenous or indigenizing, say, choral music, is that perhaps more of a better example of indigenizing choral music and orchestral music?
You can say that can be an image, so to say, a sound and image of the traditional element, using at its full capacity, attire, dress code, attires, then instruments, folk instrument, and the language that they're using. But when you go deeper into the musical aspects of analyzing what are the scales that they're using, there's a high chance of using pentatonic, which is highly influenced by Welsh. Because we are all influenced by something or the other, right? Dui tara, dui is a Hindi word, tara is Hindi word, right? Two and strings. So somewhere, somehow, you can say that is a full image of the choral indigenization. But if you look into it like deeper and deeper, well, us as music scholars and all that, we have a tendency of going into that. But as a image point of view, as a general point of view, I feel, yeah, you can say that. But I want to add another, so say a band or a choir band that just came up, Surna Nongkendong. Yeah, Yeah, Surna Nongkandong. I gave that audio to one of my friend. He said, "Oh, that's bluegrass." Oh, I was like, "That's Surna Nongkandong, man." So yeah, obviously.
Yeah. So it's complex, right? Trying even to locate the indigenous, even in a choral tradition, or a lot of these traditions. Attire, for example, is that a measure of the authenticity, or is it not? For example, the choral tradition in Goa itself, when it was first introduced by the Portuguese, it had this engagement with. But also with the Brahmanism that the Konkanis were practicing at that time, right? So even at the outset, choral tradition itself had this very interesting encounter with some of the maybe the music that the Brahmins were using. Could you talk about that?
I would say that Mando is the folk music that is talked about, and it's basically because we are in India, even though it's like caste remains, even if religion undergoes change sometimes. So now Mando has been used by all groups, but initially it was mostly people from Kurtoli, Lutoli villages who were Brahmin converts to Christianity, and that was initially their folk music. So I wouldn't say it's just the Brahmin music, but yeah, I mean, there were a lot of these ways in which some folk traditions got, found a place, and then it did not. So yeah, it is complex. And to talk about indigeneity and what is vernacular, what is authentic, we start with categories. I mean, even to think of an example like branding, like any kind of like Hillsong, the Australian gospel band. Now it's their brand has been incorporated by most church choirs, and even in Mizoram you find many translations of Hillsong songs, and you will hear the music and you will go back. So it's very complex. And there is not just one way of looking at anything, yeah.
And to further muddy the waters and further complicate matters, you have the success of the Shillong Chamber Choir, right? For example, which you in your book has described as a sort of a mixture of Bollywood and Broadway. Now, Bollywood and Broadway in themselves are these hybrid genres, right? Bollywood, example, their orchestration. They learn their orchestration from the Goan arrangers, and Broadway, of course, has always incorporated, Motown and all the popular styles. So when you look at something like the success of the Shillong Chamber Choir in the, as you put it, the choral tradition outside the cloak of faith, and that complicates matters more. Is it? Do people see that as a sellout? When they become popular like that and they win a reality TV show, is it seen as a corruption of the choral tradition or an extension of it?
Well, like I would like to call it as like in my book I call both the ways of looking at choral approaches to choral singing, as in case of Goa through the lens of nostalgia, and in case of Shillong through the lens of novelty. So I guess I would say they brought medley itself at the forefront as a genre in itself through this idea of Bollywood Broadway. Can we listen to the clip of Shillong Chamber Choir? I'll just quickly talk about it after that. 1 minute of that. Yeah. just quote
Right.
Neil. Uncle
Try to go
Neil,
and find the
yeah.
authenticity in that
Yeah.
you just saw.
So the thing is, when I had asked him about what he thinks about experimenting with choral music, he had said, and you think of this whole arena of Bollywood music, why we did it is because by accident we ended up on this TV show, which I was never keen on in the beginning, because I never thought choral music and mainstream TV would go together. That was my perception. But it just shows that life doesn't go the way you think. We are going to harmonize, we are going to give every song we sing, even a popular Hindi song, a treatment of the choral style. And somehow or the other, this has struck a chord with the nation, this has struck a chord with the people. So I guess that's my answer.
Okay, I'd love to go further into that, but I think we're running out of time. So I'll just touch upon one more thing. You've seen all the singing. You talk about in your book about this very interesting chapter on voice, right? On voicing sacredness. And you say that, you know, the soprano is generally seen as this embodiment of virtue. You cite the example of, you even take the example of Lata Mangeshkar, for example, where you say that her adolescent girl falsetto is seen by people as an embodiment of virtue, right? And so, in the same way, the soprano is seen as the highest form of the voice, you know, reaching worship, for example. Now, do you always have to sound like that? Does sacredness always have to be soprano or an adolescent girl falsetto, or do you see changes in that tradition, in voicing sacredness?
So that was actually something Sanjay Srivastava wrote about how Lata Mangeshkar's voice becomes the voice of the nation, or the ideal voice of the feminine Hinduized idea. And I drew that parallel because I was speaking to some of the soprano singers, and how it's more related to the anatomy and not about being soprano as a diva. I think I'll just it helps to read out from what my
Yeah, you mentioned about how
yeah
because
so,
of opera and the divas sing in soprano, so that imagination.
yeah, so like I'll just say something that one of them had said, that let us start with the general stereotype of soprano as a diva. It's hilarious. The voice type depends completely on the fact that you're born a certain way with certain physical structures, and that's the voice you have. You can extend your range, but the main aspect of the quality remains. It's not about singing high or low, it's about singing well and singing with good technique. For the soprano voice, you have to keep letting people know that it's not about singing high, it's about maintaining the evenness of the tone throughout. Also, I feel that soprano is the melody line, and I think for not always are all the songs we listen to with all the four voices in mind, and even we miss the harmonics, or so I also spoke to why I was interested in this hierarchization of voices, as I call it in this book, is because talking to some of the singers, I realized that singing in the alto voice gives you more suppleness, and it makes you comfortable with singing other genres and not just a particular kind of music. Whereas if you train yourself in the highest range possible, you will be fixed with singing a certain kind of song. That was the way I had brought it up. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't really going at the virtue bit in that sense, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, the embodiment of piety in that
Yeah,
way, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
the soprano embodies piety and sacredness more,
Yeah, yeah.
more than the alto. Donovan, I mean, that's how it's perceived. Donovan, outside the choral tradition, is there a perception among people of a certain kind of voice that embodies, sacredness more than the other? A soprano embodying it more than the alto, or the bass being devilish and soprano being
Well, let me think a little.
So no, I think that
I
no
don't think
is
so.
enough.
There's that image, but I would also agree with Sebanti over here. Soprano is a very important part of the song. Generally, the soprano will be singing the melody part, right? So when you have the melody, then all these things will fall into place. Say you harmonize the bass, the mezzo, the alto, and the tenor, right? So this concept of harmony is very, I feel it's one of the best to explain of the diversity that we have, and having a soprano as the main part, then you have different voices, but they sound sweet. So I'd say that.
Is that a prerequisite of sacral music to sound sweet?
I don't know. I think one thing that is expected is the intent. I mean, if it's a devotional song, it depends how seriously, how solemnly you are partaking it. And especially if you're, I mean, that's why when I am not from the faith, then I have to follow the performance ethics of how to be solemn, how to understand in that sense of the term.
I just want to add one thing there about the solemnity of church music, so to say. I had once sat on a church service. I won't say which denomination. I go to many denomination. They gave a special item of a metal song. So I was like, how do we measure all of that? A metal song. They were all throat, like that. And by the end of the song, then I think the pastor or someone said, I appreciate you could express your faith through that type of music. So, yeah.
Yeah, outside the choral tradition, of course, there's so many different styles, like Christian metal, Christian hip hop, and all of that. Just one final question before we wrap up. I wanted to ask you, as you were talking about solemnity and and achieving that, as this Brahmin girl, how did you achieve that when you were performing Christian music?
So only with the Goa University choir that I sang with, I did participant observation, and it was mainly because we had certain notes. I mean, it's like you are using like your body as an instrument, and you are singing it out, you're belting it out, and you are part of a collective. It's the sound of the collective. Nobody is shining more or less. So it was just that, following and knowing when to fade out and when to come in.
So just to wrap up, would you say that it's true in terms of like the centrality of faith in the choral tradition? Perhaps Shillong has moved away from not all of it, of course. There's still great choirs, that thing, but it's not necessarily that one has to be steeped in that tradition, right? In like you say, it can be performed outside the cloak of faith. So have you been following any choirs from Shillong, apart from the Shillong Chamber Choir? Any new choirs who are performing outside the cloak of faith who are very interesting? Or Goa, for that matter?
Well, not like that. Not recently. I haven't been following that. But I would say, when I say that moving away from the cloak of sacredness, I also talk about how faith is everyday. It's also embedded in our everyday ritual, and that comes across, even though it's not always through, say, a choral rendition. So because sometimes people do encounter their first, at least the people I've spoken to in the course of the book, they have encountered faith at the church, but then they have moved away from it. And yeah, I think it's not about who is doing what or more or less, but I look at it as experimentations, as creative processes. And as Donovan and I were also having a chat, and he was talking about some EDM music being performed as well. So I think within the point is that how do we think of genre and possibilities of genres, and how do we place sacrality amid all of that, if that is central to being who we are or where we come from. That became important, I guess. Yeah. Thank you.
So I think, as is clear through our conversation, that Sebanti is more profound than I've allowed her to be. So please buy the book and read it yourself. I've barely covered or touched upon 10% of the book, so please go and buy it. It's a wonderful read. A little difficult, but it's still at the at the end of it a wonderful read. So thank you very much, Sebanti and Donovan, for participating in this discussion on the sound and sacrality and ethnographic imaginations. And thank you for your insights on the God note, the frequency. So that's it. If you have any questions, I think Sebanti and Donovan will be more than happy to take them.
Okay, thank you so much, Donovan, Sebanti, and Mark. Now I'd like to present.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I did not say thank you, Kong Mary, for inviting me. And I'm very happy to do this talk in Shillong because I've not had a talk about my book in Shillong yet, and it is based on Shillong. And thank you so much, Mark and Donovan, for facilitating this conversation. And thank you so much.